Hey everyone, and welcome back to Daily Tuition. In this complete tutorial, you will understand how to create the CRUD operation using Express and MongoDB database. So we're going to create this user management system to manage the user. I'm going to show you how to store and retrieve all this data in the MongoDB cloud database. Now let me show you how this application works. The application is very simple to use. When you open the application, you will get the list of the user from the database. Now let me create a new user. So I'm going to click on this new user button. When you click on it, you will have a form to create a new user. I'm going to create a new user, so I'm going to specify name to this user. Then I'm going to specify email. Then I'm going to specify gender, female, and status inactive. I want to create this user, so I'm going to click on this save button. When I click on it, I'm going to have the alert message, data inserted successfully. When I click on OK button, this will reset the form, and when you back to the all users, here you have your user. In case you want to update the user, just click on this edit button. I want to update this user, so I'm going to just click on this edit button. When I click on it, the form will auto-fill all the user data inside this form. So you just need to specify the updated data inside this form. So I want to just update this email. So here I'm going to just specify test.com and I'm going to change this status to active. Now I want to update this data, so I'm going to click on this save button. When I click on it, here I'm going to have a message, data updated successfully. When I click OK, and back to the all users, here I have the updated data. Now once you understand how to create and update the record, let me show you how to delete the record from the database. So I want to delete this record. I'm going to click on this delete button, and when I click on it, you will have a message, do you really want to delete this record? Yes, I want to delete it. So I'm going to press on this OK button. When I click on it, you will get an alert message, data deleted successfully. When you press OK, the record is now successfully deleted from the database. When you finish this tutorial, you will be able to work with server and client side. You will completely understand how to create an API, how to make the AJAX request, as well as you will understand how to work with Axios library. You will be able to work with EJS template engine, and you will understand how to work with different HTTP methods, and so on. If you're a beginner, then this is what you need. Follow me and join this amazing journey. Before wasting your too much time, let's get started. So let's get started and see how to create this beautiful Express CRUD application using Node. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the Visual Studio Code editor, and inside it I have this tutorial folder. Inside this tutorial folder, I'm going to create another folder to create my project, and I'm going to name this folder CRUD app. If you want, you can specify any name to this folder, that doesn't matter. I'm going to name this project CRUD app. I'm going to create this folder, and inside this folder, I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to name this file server.js. This file is going to allow us to start the server. So I'm going to create a server.js file. You can name this file anything. And just out of that, I'm going to just initialize this project as npm package. So I'm going to open my terminal and enter into my CRUD application directory. So here I'm going to say cd CRUD app. When I press enter, this will enter into my CRUD application directory, and here I'm going to say npm init. This command will ask me few questions about this package.json file. So it will just ask me to specify the name for this package. I'm going to specify the default name CRUD app, leave the version as it is. Here I'm going to say CRUD application with Express and MongoDB. I'm going to specify description. Just out of that, I'm going to specify entry point server.js. I'm going to leave this as it is. Test command is going to be as it is. I'm going to leave this git repository, specify keyword CRUD, and I'm going to say here MongoDB. Press enter, then specify my name here as author. I'm going to specify the default license, and press enter to create package.json file and initialize this project as npm package. As you can notice, I'm going to have here a file package.json, and here I have my information. As you can notice here, I have the start command node server.js. So when you execute this command, it's going to execute this server.js file. Now just out of that, what I want to install some external module inside this project so I can use it in this CRUD application. So I'm going to open my terminal, clear the screen, and here I'm going to say npm I for install, and then I'm going to specify my packages. So I'm going to install a few packages at the same time using a single command. So here I'm going to say Express. In this project, we are using Express to rapidly develop the Node application. So here I'm going to say Express. Then I'm going to install Morgan. As you know, Morgan helps us to log a message every time when we make a request. Just out of that, I'm going to install NodeMon. Make sure you specify space between these modules. So I'm going to specify here NodeMon. NodeMon allows us to restart the server automatically when we make changes in the project. Just out of that, I'm going to install EJS, which is the template engine I'm using for this project. EJS allows us to create dynamic HTML. Just out of that, I'm going to install Body Parser. Body Parser module allows us to serialize the data and access the form data using body property. Just out of that, I'm going to install .env. .env module allows you to separate the secret from your source code. This is useful in collaborative environment where you may not want to share your database login credential with other people. Instead, you can share the source code while allowing other people to create their own .env file. So once I have my .env, just out of that, we are going to install Mongoose. Using this module, we are going to connect this project with MongoDB database. And at the last, I'm going to install Axios library. This library makes it easy to make a request in Express application. So I'm going to say here Axios. I want to install all these libraries as dependencies. So I'm going to press enter. Now as you can notice, we have these packages inside this node modules folder. If you open the package.json, here you can notice in the dependency section, you have all your packages. Let me just clear the screen and just specify here a start command. So instead of node server.js, here I'm going to say nodemon server.js. Nodemon modules allows us to restart the server whenever we make a changes. So I'm going to say here nodemon. Save the changes, back to the server.js, and now let's create the project structure. Now let's take a look at how to create project structure of this CURD application. So whenever you make a big project in Node or in Express application, you should have the project structure like this. In your application, you should have the asset folder in the root directory where all the assets of your project is located. So inside this CURD application, inside this CURD app folder, I'm going to create a new folder and name this folder assets, where I'm going to have all the assets of this project. Inside this asset folder, I'm going to create a new folder with the name CSS. I'm going to create a CSS folder, and inside this CSS, I'm going to have my CSS file. Just like that, inside this asset folder, I'm going to create another folder with name JS. So inside this JS folder, I'm going to create all the client-side JavaScript files. Just like that, inside this asset, I'm going to create another folder with name img. So inside this img folder, I'm going to have all the images which we are using in this project. I'm not using any image here, but this folder is just for understanding. Just like that, once you have this asset folder, once you complete this asset folder structure, minimize this asset folder, and inside this CRUD app, I'm going to create another folder. So here I'm going to click on this new folder icon and name this folder views. Inside this views folder, I'm going to put all the HTML files. I'm using the embedded JavaScript template engine to create a dynamic HTML. So I'm going to put all the HTML files inside this views folder. This is the default folder of view engine of Express. Just for that, I'm going to create here inside this CRUD application, I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to name this folder server. And inside this server folder, I'm going to have all the server side code. For example, inside this folder, I'm going to create my services, model, MongoDB connection, and so on. Once you have your server folder inside it, I'm going to create few folders. Because we are following the MVC pattern of application, I'm going to create few folders inside this server folder. MVC is an application design pattern that separates the application data and business logic from the presentation. MVC stands for model, view, and controller. The controller mediates between the model and view. So in the MVC pattern, we have model, controller, and view. You can notice we already have the view folder here. So I'm not going to create that again. And now let's create the controller and model folder inside this server folder. So here inside this server folder, I'm going to create a new folder and name this folder controller. Just like that, inside this server, I'm going to create another folder with name model. Inside this model folder, we are going to work with MongoDB data. Here we're going to perform the data validation, processing data, creating Mongo scheme, and so on. Just for that, we have controller. inside the controller, we're going to deal with user request for resources from the server. So here in this controller, we're going to create a different functions that's going to send the resources to the user. So as you can notice, we have this MVC pattern. M for module, V for views, and C for controller. Now just for that, inside this server, I'm going to create another folder. This folder is for database connection. So I'm going to create a new folder and say database. It is always a best practice to separate your code so you can maintain it very easily. So once I have this database folder, just after that, I'm going to create another folder inside this server, and I'm going to name this folder routes. Inside this routes, I'm going to create my different routes. Just after that, I'm going to create another folder inside this server and name this folder services. So as you can notice, your project structure is now completely ready. Inside your project, you should have your asset folder, the server folder, and the views folder. Now once you have the project structure, something like this, let's create the HTTP server. So let me just minimize these folders, and in the server.js, I'm going to create my HTTP server. Now to create the HTTP server, I'm going to just back to my server.js file, and inside it, I'm going to first require the express module. So here I'm going to say constant express and call the required function. So using this function, we can use the express module. So using this statement, we can use the express module. Just for that, I'm going to create my app. So here I'm going to say constant app is equal to express, like this. I'm going to initialize this app variable as express application. Just for that, here I'm going to just create my default route. So here I'm going to say app.get, and here in the single code, I'm going to specify root route. So when the URL match to the root route, I'm going to execute the callback function. So here I'm going to say request and response. I'm going to call the arrow function of ES6, and here I'm going to say response.send, and I'm going to send the response CURD application. Just for that, I'm going to just listen the server on port 3000. I'm going to say here app.listen. I'm going to listen this port on 3000. So here I'm going to say 3000, and just for that, as a callback function, as a second argument to this listen method, here I'm going to call a callback function like this and say console.log, and using the backtick operator, I'm going to say server is running on HTTP localhost, and then specify $, and then specify my port name. Here I'm going to specify 3000, like this. Save this file, open the terminal, and as you know, we have the start command inside this package.json file. Here I'm going to execute this command and execute this server.js file. So here I'm going to say npm start. So this command will execute this nodemon server.js and start the HTTP server. When I press enter, you are going to get a message, server is running on HTTP localhost 3000. Let me just click on this link and open my application in the browser. Oops, I think I misspelled the L here. I misspelled the spelling localhost. Save the changes. Let me just click on this link, and as you can notice, we're going to have CRUD application as a response. Now once your server is successfully started, let me just make some changes inside this HTTP request. What I'm going to do is, just after this app, I'm going to create here a variable constant port is equal to, and I'm going to just store my all details inside the .env file. So here I'm going to say process.env.port, and if the variable of this .env file is not available, I'm going to just pass the default value 8080, and instead of this hard-coded 300 value, I'm going to pass this variable like this. Save the changes, open the terminal. As you can notice, the server is now started on port 8080, because as you know, we don't have this port variable inside .env file. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to create .env file and create a variable inside it and specify value to it. Right now, it's going to specify the default value to this port variable, which is 8080. So now your server is running on this 8080 port. I'm going to just create a new file inside this CRUD application and name this file config.env, and inside this file, I'm going to create my port variable. Creating a variable inside env file is super easy. You just need to specify the variable name and its value using equal to sign. So here I'm going to say port equal to sign and then specify the value 3000. So I'm going to specify 3000 value to this port variable. Let me just save the changes. Back to the server.js, and now let me just save this file as well. But as you can notice, it's still getting the default port name. So what you need to do is, you need to specify the path of this config file, and you need to inform the Express server to use the variable of this .env file. So just out of this constant express, I'm going to say constant .env is equal to require, and I'm going to just call .env module like this. And just before this port variable, here I'm going to say .env .config. I'm going to call a method config, and inside this parenthesis, I'm going to specify the path of this config file. So we can use the port variable. So here I'm going to say path, and then specify in the single quote config.env. As you know, we have this config.env file inside the root directory. So I don't need to specify any relative path here. Save the changes. So as you can notice, this will just start the server on port 3000. .env module allows you to separate your secret from your source code. This is very useful when you work with collaborative environment, when you want to share your code with other people. So instead of sharing your credential, you can share the source code while allowing other people to create their own .env file. Now once you understand how to create .env, let's move on. So just out of that, just after this .env, down here, I'm going to just add the Morgan module. So up here, I'm going to say constant Morgan and call the require statement and require the Morgan module. Just down here, just after this .env, I'm going to create here a command log request. So as you know, Morgan module allows us to log a request on the console whenever we make a request. So here I'm going to say app.use and specify the Morgan module, and inside it I'm going to call the tiny token. So let me just reload the browser, back to the editor, and as you can notice, this will just print the type of request, the path, and the response millisecond. Now once you understand how to print a log message using Morgan, let me show you how to add body parser inside this project. So let's see how to do it. So let me first stop the server because we don't need it, and now let me add body parser module. Now let me just add the body parser module. So down here, I'm going to say constant body parser is equal to require, and require the body parser module. And just out of this Morgan down here, I'm going to create a command and say pass request to body parser. So down here, I'm going to say app.use, and inside this parenthesis, I'm going to call the body parser module dot URL encoded method, and in the parenthesis I'm going to specify object with property extended true. So this will just pass the request of the content type from URL encoded. So once you link the body parser module, just down here I'm going to just set the view engine. So here I'm going to say set view engine, and as you know, in this project I'm using embedded JavaScript. So here I'm going to say app.set, and in the parenthesis I'm going to first specify the view engine parameter. So we can specify the view engine to this Express application, and then we need to specify the type of view engine I'm using. So in the double quote, I'm going to specify the extension of view engine. I'm using EJS view engine, so I'm going to specify here EJS. If you're using Pug or HTML, you can specify here HTML or Pug. That's upon you. I'm using the EJS template engine, so I'm going to specify the template name EJS. Just out of that, if you create all your EJS file inside this views folder, then you don't have to specify the folder name to this EJS template engine. But if you change this views folder, for example, you create another folder inside this views folder and put all your EJS files inside that folder, then you need to inform Express to set that folder as a default view engine folder. So to do that, you need to call a statement app.set, and in the parenthesis, you need to specify views as the first argument and then specify the path of that folder. So what you need to do is, you need to call the path module of node application. So here I'm going to say constant path is equal to require, and require the inbuilt path module. As you know, I did not install this path module using npm because the path module is inbuilt in Node application. You just need to require it. So once I require the path module, just down here, as the second argument, I'm going to say path dot resolve. I'm going to call a method of path resolve, and then I'm going to specify here directory name. So this will just return the project directory name to this resolve method. Just out of that, I'm going to specify comma here, and in the double quote you need to specify the folder name where you put all your EJS files. So for example, if you put all your EJS files inside EJS folder, then you need to specify here views /EJS. I'm not going to create any dedicated folder for this EJS file, so I'm not going to add this statement here. So I'm going to comment it. This is just for reference. Now just out of that, once I specify the view engine for this application, just down here I'm going to just load my asset. So here I'm going to say load assets. I'm going to load my asset using middleware method use. So I'm going to call here use method, and I'm going to first specify the virtual path for these assets. So as you know, we have assets inside this asset folder. So I'm going to specify single quote and specify path for this CSS folder. So here I'm going to say CSS, then specify comma, and then say express.static. I'm going to call the static method of express. I'm going to say path.resolve and call the directory name. So this will return the current project directory name, specify comma, and in the double quote I'm going to say assets. I'm going to specify this asset folder name /CSS. So now if you create the style.css file inside this CSS folder, you need to just specify CSS /style.css. Now for example, let's say you have style.css file inside this CSS folder. Here inside this CSS, I'm going to create a file style.css, and now you want to access this file. So what you want to do is you just need to specify a path like this, CSS /style.css. That's it. You don't need to specify the project name, the asset folder, and so on. You need to just specify the virtual path and the file name. That's it. Now once you understand how to add this CSS styling, let me just load the images and JavaScript files. So I'm going to just duplicate this statement. So I'm going to press Shift Alt down key 2 times, and here I'm going to just change this CSS to img. This CSS became img, and this became JS, like this. Now as you can notice, we successfully load the asset inside this HTTP server. Next, we're going to create views for this Express application. Now let's take a look at how to create HTML templates for this CURD application. As you know, I already set up the view engine EJS to this CURD application. So let's create .ejs files to create HTML template. So what I'm going to do is, inside this views folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to name that file index.ejs. As you can notice, I'm going to specify the extension EJS. This is not the HTML file. If you want to learn more about EJS, you can head on to EJS website right here, ejs.co. EJS stands for Embedded JavaScript Templating. From ejs.co, you can get started with EJS and understand how to work with EJS template. Let me just close this tab, back to my project, and inside this index.ejs, I'm going to create a simple HTML5 snippet. So I'm going to press exclamation mark and press tab. This will simply create the simple HTML5 snippet, and here to this document, I'm going to specify title CRUD application. Just out of that, inside this body, down here, I'm going to create the header. So I'm going to first create here HTML command and say here header. Let me just close this command to indicate this is the closing header, like this. And inside this header, I'm going to create a header tag with ID. So I'm going to specify here hash, specify ID name header. When I press tab, I'm going to have header tag with ID header. Inside this header, I'm going to create a nav tag, and inside this nav, I'm going to create a division tag with the class container. So here I'm going to say dot container. When I press tab, I'm going to have a division tag with the class container. Just out of that, inside this container, I'm going to create a div with the class text center. I'm going to create all these classes in the style.css file, so don't worry about that. So when I press tab, I'm going to have this text center class to this division tag. Inside this div, I'm going to add anchor tag. I'm going to specify /, This refers to the root route of this application. Just out of that, here I'm going to specify class, nav brand, and text dark. I'm going to create these classes in the style.css file. Here I'm going to say user management system. Save the changes. So let me just open my terminal. Here I'm going to say npm start and press enter. My server is turning on http localhost 3000. This will return the response CRUD application. Now what I want to return the response of this HTML file instead of this response. So instead of this response, I want to render this index.ejs file. So what I'm going to do is, here I'm going to call a method of response object. Here I'm going to say response.render. This method allows us to render an HTML file. So I'm going to say here render. In the single quote, I'm going to specify the file name. Here I'm going to say index.ejs. You don't have to specify extension for this file name because we already initialized this view engine with EJS extension. And just out of that, don't forget to specify semicolon, back to the browser and reload it. As you can notice, I'm going to have the user management system text. So this will just load the index file on the root route. Let me just change few things inside this index.ejs. I'm going to just get this header and put that header in the separate dedicated header file, and bring this footer and put it inside a separate footer file so we can manage it more easily. What we are going to do is, inside these views, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to name this include. If you want, you can name this folder anything. Inside this folder, I'm going to create a new file with underscore to indicate this is the partial file of index.ejs. So here I'm going to say underscore header.ejs. To indicate this is the partial file, I'm going to start this file name with underscore. In this header, I'm going to just grab this header right from here, from this closing header, cut it from this index.ejs and paste it inside this header.ejs. Save the changes, back to the index.ejs and grab this closing body and this HTML, cut it right from here, create a new file inside this include and name that file underscore footer.ejs and put this closing body and HTML inside this file. Back to the index.ejs and here I'm going to include both these files. So I'm going to just first add a command, an HTML command, and here I'm going to say include header. Don't forget to close this command to indicate this is the closing header section of this template. Now inside this command, I'm going to add my EJS syntax to include both these files. So here I'm going to call EJS syntax like this, and inside this EJS syntax, I'm going to say include. In the parentheses, I'm going to specify the path of my partial files. So in the single quote, I'm going to specify include /, then specify the header file like this. And as you know, we have the prefix underscore. So I'm going to specify underscore as a prefix for this file. Just out of that, I'm going to copy this statement and paste it down here. Change this header to footer like this and change this header file to footer like this. Save the changes, and if you open your terminal, then you can notice you make the changes inside your EJS files, but the server is not restarted because the nodemon is only restarted when you make changes in the JS files. So we need to inform nodemon to restart the server whenever we make changes inside these EJS files. But instead of informing nodemon to restart the server every time when we make the changes inside this file, I'm going to create a demo HTML file and use a live server extension of Visual Studio Code Editor. I'm going to create .html file and create a complete design inside that file and use the live server extension of Visual Studio Code Editor so we can easily save the changes and restart the server. So instead of restarting the server and reloading the browser, I'm going to stop this server like this, close this terminal, and inside these views, I'm going to create a new file just for design, and here I'm going to say index.html. Just out of that, inside this file, I'm going to put all this index.ejs code. So here I'm going to call this header like this and this footer. Save the changes, and now let me just start the live server. So I'm going to just open my extension of the Visual Studio Code Editor And here you can notice I have the live server extension installed in this Visual Studio Code editor. If you don't have this extension, just search for it in this search extension text box. Just search for live server and open it. I already have this live server, so I'm not going to install it again. Using this live server, this will launch a local server with live reload feature. So whenever you make any changes inside HTML file, this will automatically reflect on the live server. You don't have to restart the server every time when you make changes. So once I install this live server extension, let me just open this file in the live server. So I'm going to just right click here and say open with live server. As you can notice, I'm going to have the same result. This is my node application server and this is my live server extension. Now we are going to work on this live server. So let me just close this node application server. Now just after that, once I have this live server, let me just start designing this beautiful body section of this website. So what we are going to do is, once I have the header of this website, let me just create the main section of this website. I'm going to create HTML command and say main site. Let me just copy this command, paste it down here and close it. Inside this main section, I'm going to say main and create ID to this main tag. So here I'm going to say site main. I'm going to create a main tag with ID site main. Just after that, I'm going to create a container with div, and inside this container I'm going to create a box nav class. So here I'm going to say dot box nav. With this box nav, I'm going to add another class deflex, and I'm going to add justify between class. You can notice here how I specify different classes in the Visual Studio Code editor. When I press tab, you can notice I have all these classes to this division tag. Inside this div, I'm going to create an anchor tag and specify the path add user. So when you click on this anchor tag, this will navigate us to this add user URL. And just for that, I'm going to specify here class border shadow. Inside this anchor tag, I'm going to create a span tag with class text gradient. Just for that, here I'm going to create a text new user, and here I'm going to add an icon. As you know, I did not included any library inside this project, so I'm going to just add a simple library so I can import icons inside this project. So I will just back to my browser and open a new tab, and here I'm going to search for font awesome CDN. So I'm going to link this font using content delivery network. So I'm going to just click on this cdnjs.com, open this in a new tab, and in this tab I'm going to open the font awesome icons, this one, and I'm going to just back to the cdnjs.com, copy this first link allmean.css right from here and paste it in the header section of this website. So just out of this title, here I'm going to paste this link like this. Back to the browser and back to the icons fonts, and right from here I'm going to first select the user icon. So here I'm going to say user, and I'm going to select this icon, this one, user. I'm going to right click here and say open in a new tab. As you can notice here, you can access this icon using this code, this one. Just copy it and paste it wherever you want to add that icon. Here I'm going to paste that code like this. Back to the website, and as you can notice, you have your icon here. So this is how you can add different icons inside this project. So once you understand how to add these icons inside your project, let me just back to my project, and just out of this division tag right down here, I'm going to create a simple HTML command and say form handling. And here I'm going to say form. I'm going to create an HTML form and specify the root route to this form. So when we click on this form, I want to redirect the user to the root route. Just for that, don't forget to specify method, which is post, and inside this form I'm going to create my table. Here I'm going to say table. To this table I'm going to specify class, which is table. Inside this table, here I'm going to create thead, the head of the table, with the class thead dark. I want to specify dark color to this head section, so I'm going to specify class tdark. Inside this head, I'm going to create table row. In th, I'm going to specify id. Then I'm going to duplicate this th like this, change this id, and here I'm going to say name. This became email. I'm going to specify here @ email. Then I'm going to specify here gender, this became status, and at the last I'm going to specify here action. Just down here, just after this T head, after this closing T head, I'm going to create T body. I'm going to create a tag T body, and inside this T body I'm going to create the body of this table. So let me just save the changes first. Back to the project, and here you can notice I have my table, and now inside this body I'm going to specify data to this table. So here inside this body I'm going to create table row and table data. I'm going to first specify ID, so I'm going to specify here 1. Duplicate this statement like this. Change this second text to username, or you can specify name here, and here I'm going to specify example@gmail.com. then I'm going to specify gender, which is male. Status is going to be active, and inside this DD I'm going to add delete and edit button. So here I'm going to get rid of this one, and inside this DD I'm going to add delete and update button. So here I'm going to create 2 anchor tags that help us to edit and delete these records. So here I'm going to add anchor tag, and I'm not going to specify here anything right now. So I'm going to specify here hash, then specify class btn border shadow, and then to access this anchor tag I'm going to add a class update. So this will just indicate this is the button for update. Inside this anchor tag I'm going to create a span tag, and to this span tag I'm going to specify class text gradient. Then inside this span I'm going to add my icon. So here inside this span I'm going to add I tag with the class vas fa pencil alt. So this will import the pencil icon inside this anchor tag. Let me just save the changes. Back to the project, and here you can notice, oops, where is my icon? Oops, I think I misspelled here pencil. Back to the project, and here you can notice I have my icon here inside my project. Let me just close these unwanted tabs. Back to my project, copy this anchor tag completely and paste it down here. Instead of update, I'm going to say here delete. I'm not going to specify here any href attribute here, so I'm going to get rid of this href attribute because I don't want to redirect the user anywhere. Just out of that, I'm going to just specify icon to this delete. So here I'm going to say fast fa times. Save the changes, and here you can notice I have my icon. Now once I have my design of this HTML, let me just link my style.css file to this index file and style this HTML page. So to style this index file, I'm going to just add my style.css file here. So I'm going to say here link, specify the path of the style.css file. So inside this asset, I have CSS folder and this style.css. Save the changes, and back to the style.css, and let me just style this index file. So very first, I'm going to add the font family inside this project. I'm going to open a new tab and say Google Fonts. And from this Google Fonts website, I'm going to import some fonts inside this project and use it. So in the search box, I'm going to search for Barlow, this font. I'm going to select the normal style, the regular 400 style. I'm going to select this style, then back to the main page, and I'm going to select PT Sans, this one. I'm going to select this font, and I'm going to select this regular 400. So I'm going to click on this select this style. And as you can notice, I have here 2 options to import this font inside my project. Here I have the link tag and the import tag. I'm going to use this import tag, copy this import statement and paste it at the top of this style.css file like this. Once I imported these fonts inside my project, let me just create some variables. So here I'm going to add colon root, and inside this root I'm going to create some variables. So here I'm going to say double dash dark and specify color to this dark variable, and then I'm going to specify the hex value of the color like this. So I can use this dark color using this dark variable name. So I'm going to create few variables here inside this root directory, and just out of that, down here I'm going to select all the elements of the HTML and remove padding. I'm going to specify padding 0, margin is going to be 0, and box sizing is going to be border box. Just out of that, I'm going to select all the anchor tags, then specify text decoration, none. This will remove the bottom border from the anchor tags. Then I'm going to specify the font family. So I'm going to back to the Google font, and here you can notice I have this PT Sans. I'm going to copy this font family, paste it here, save the changes. This will just apply this PT Sans font family to this text. Just down here, I'm going to create my container. So I'm going to create a container class, container. Inside it, I'm going to say max width is going to be 1024 pixel. Then I'm going to say margin auto. This will just center all the content of this container. As you can notice, this will center this content. Just down here, I'm going to say now brand, then specify font size is going to be 1.5 em, and font width is going to be bold. This will update this title. Just down here, I'm going to say deflex. I'm going to create a deflex class and specify display flex. Then specify flex wrap. Save the changes. You can find this class right here. We have this deflex and this justify between. Oops, I think I specify here dash. Just remove it and separate both these classes. Back to the style, and just down here, I'm going to say justify between. Then specify justify content space between. Just down here, I'm going to create a class text center, and here I'm going to say text align center. Then I'm going to say border shadow, and then specify border 1 pixel solid and call my variable. So here I'm going to say var double dash and call the variable name border btn. Just out of that, here I'm going to say box shadow, and here I'm going to say 1 pixel, 3 pixel and 10 pixel, as well as I'm going to specify here hex color to this shadow like this. Down here I'm going to create a class text dark. This will specify dark color to the text. So here I'm going to say color dark. Just down here I'm going to say inline and specify display inline block. So whenever you want to specify inline block display property to the element, you can specify this inline class. I'm going to say here text light, color is going to be light. Save the changes. Just down here I'm going to say text gradient, and to this text gradient class I'm going to specify text gradient to this text. So I need to add some useful CSS properties to specify gradient color to the text. So inside this class I'm going to specify background property to specify liner gradient. So here I'm going to say liner gradient, and inside this liner gradient I'm going to specify to gradient color. So here I'm going to say to right, specify comma, and then I'm going to specify two gradient colors here. Just out of that, here I'm going to specify WebKit background clip property. This CSS property is not actually supported to the Chrome browser. So I'm going to specify here WebKit as an extension to this background clip property. And here I'm going to specify text. Then I'm going to specify here background clip text. Just down here, I'm going to specify hyphen WebKit text fill color, and I'm going to specify text fill color transparent. Save the changes. As you can notice, this will just add gradient color to these icons because we have text gradient class to this HTML element. Just down here, just out of this class, I'm going to create my header section. So I'm going to first select the header and then select the nav class. Inside this nav, I'm going to specify background color, and I'm going to specify here hex color, this one, and inside this nav I'm going to add some padding to it, 1 em to the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. Then add width, which is 100%. Save the changes. This will just add background color and add some width to this nav tag. Just down here I'm going to select the site main, then select the margin top 6 em. So this will add the top margin to this table, and just out of that I'm going to copy this font family and paste it here. Save the changes. This will add some margin to this table and add this font family. Now just for that, I'm going to add some styling to this button. So I'm going to select first site main, then select the container class, then select the box nav, and inside it I have the anchor tag. I'm going to select it. Specify font size 1 em, and padding is going to be 0.5 em to the top and bottom and 1 em to the left and right. Save the changes. This will just add padding to this button. Just out of that, I'm going to select the form. So I'm going to select this container and this site main selector like this, then select the form, and I'm going to add some margin to this form. So here I'm going to say margin 2 em to the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. Just after that, I'm going to select this table, then specify border spacing 0 pixel and width is going to be 100. Just out of that, here I'm going to select dot table td, select all the td element, then select the table again and select all the th element and specify padding 0.75 em, and then I'm going to specify vertical align top. Just out of that, I'm going to specify text align center, and border top is going to be 1 pixel solid, and then specify my border color, this one, like this. Just out of that, I'm going to select the button, these ones. So here I'm going to say table, then select the td class. Inside it I have anchor tag with the class btn. I'm going to select it, specify padding 0.3 em to the top and bottom and 1 em to the left and right. Then add font size 1.1 em, and margin is going to be 0 for the top and bottom and 0.2 em to the left and right. Save the changes. This will add some padding to these buttons. Just down here, I'm going to add hover effect on this table. So here I'm going to say dot table. On tr, I'm going to add hover effect. Here I'm going to say background color, and then I'm going to add this background color, this one, like this. Save the changes. When I hover on this row, I'm going to have this background effect. Just for that, as you can notice, when I hover on this row, I want to remove this background shadow from these buttons. So I'm going to select first table, then select table row, and when I hover on it, I want to remove the shadow from the buttons. So here I'm going to select table data. Inside it I have anchor tag. I'm going to select that anchor tag and say here box shadow none. Save the changes. When I hover on this row, I will not get any box shadow to these buttons. Just down here, I'm going to just make this table dark. So here I'm going to select table t head dark. I already have this class to the table head section. Just for that, I'm going to select th element and specify color white. So here I'm going to specify hex color, then specify background color. Background color is going to be dark. So I'm going to call here my dark background variable like this. Just down here, I'm going to specify border color, and this is going to be a light color. So I'm going to select the hex value and specify that like this. Save the changes. As you can notice, I have the dark color to this table head. Now, as you can notice, we successfully specify a beautiful style to this HTML page. Next, I'm going to show you how to make this table responsive. Now, we're going to understand how to make this table responsive. So let me first open the inspect tool of Chrome. Click on this toggle device toolbar and specify here viewport, then 24. If the viewport is less than that, I want to make this table responsive. So I'm going to just back to my style.css file, and down here I'm going to say @media only screen, and say here and max width. If it is 1024 pixel, then I want to change few properties of this table. So here I'm going to first select table, then select t head, then select t body, then select th element, td and tr, and specify display block. Save the changes. Just down here, I'm going to say t head table row, And to this table row, I'm going to specify position absolute. Top is going to be minus 99999. Just out of that, I'm going to specify left minus 49 pixel. So this will just remove the top section of this table when the viewport is less than 1024 pixel. Just down here, I'm going to specify table row, then specify border 1 pixel solid, and then I'm going to add my border variable. Just down here, I'm going to say table data, then specify border none, and border bottom is going to be 1 pixel solid, and then specify my border variable. Just out of that, down here, I'm going to say position relative. Let me just remove this border. That's better. And save the changes. Okay, notice the table is now responsive. If you want, you can add the table header as well, but I don't want to add that. That is why I'll remove that header from this application. So now your table is now responsive. Now, once you understand how to make this table responsive, let me show you how to create a new user form in this project. So when you click on this new user button, I want to navigate user to the new form where the client can specify their username, email, gender, and status. So I'm going to create a new form where the user can specify their information. So I'm going to just back to my editor, and inside this editor here I'm going to create a new file. So inside this views, I'm going to create a new file and name this file add user.html. Just out of that, inside this file, I'm going to just copy all the code from this index.html and paste it inside this add user file like this. And instead of this table, I'm going to add form here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this action attribute from this form, and here I'm going to specify ID, which is update user like this. Save the changes and open this file in the live server. So here I'm going to specify add user.html. So as you can notice, this will just open this file, and just out of that, I'm going to make some changes inside this box now. So I'm going to get rid of this anchor tag. Here I'm going to create filter class and specify here an anchor tag with a root href attribute, then specify text all users. Save the changes, back to the project, and here you can notice you have the all user text here. Let me add here an icon. So let me just back to my project, and I'm going to specify here fast fa angle double left. Save the changes. This will add this icon to this text. Just out of that, just out of this box snap down here, I'm going to create another div with form title class, as well as I'm going to specify text center class. And here I'm going to create h2 heading tag with text new user and specify class to it, which is text dark. And after this h2 heading tag, I'm going to add here a span tag with a class text light, and specify text here. Use the below form to create a new account. Save the changes, back to the project, and you will see the result something like this. Now just out of that, down here inside this form, I'm going to add a division tag with a class new user, and inside this new user I'm going to create a division tag. So here I'm going to say form group, and inside this form group I'm going to create a label for name and specify class text light, then specify text name, then create input of the type hidden, then specify name to it id, and specify value. And just out of that, I'm going to specify here input type text, specify name attribute, which is name, and value is going to be empty, and then specify placeholder, which is Mark Stoinis. Save the changes, back to the project, and here you can notice I have my form input element. If you want, you can specify any placeholder here. Just out of that, I'm going to create another input element. So I'm going to copy this form group, paste it down here, and instead of name here I'm going to say email. This for became email. Then I'm going to get rid of this input hidden and change this placeholder. Here I'm going to say example@gmail.com, and name attribute is going to be email. Just for that, copy this form group again, paste it down here, and this time I'm going to specify for gender. Don't forget to change this email to gender. And here I'm going to create a division tag with class radio button. So here I'm going to create a class radio with inline class. So here I'm going to say dot inline. As you know, we already have this class inside style.css file. This will specify display inline to this division tag. Inside this div, I'm going to grab this input and paste it. And I'm going to change this type and specify type radio. Then name is going to be gender and value is going to be male. I'm going to get rid of this placeholder and then specify this label. Copy this label, paste it down here like this. Just specify here male. Back to the browser, and here you can notice you have the radio button male. Just out of that, I'm going to copy this radio like this, paste it down here, change this value to female, and this became female. Save the changes. Here you can notice you have two radio buttons. I'm going to do the same for the status as well. So I'm going to just copy this form group right from here like this and paste it down here. And instead of this gender, I'm going to specify here status. This became status like this. Value became active and inactive. I'm going to change it to active, and this became inactive. So here I have a status active and inactive. Now let me just add a button to submit this form. So just out of this form group right down here, I'm going to add form group class, and inside it I'm going to add a button, and this is the type of submit button. Then specify class to it, btn text dark update, and then I'm going to specify save as a text. Save the changes and back to the browser. Here you can notice I have the button save. Now let me just add styling to this form. Once you understand how to create this beautiful add user form, let me specify some styling to it. Let me just back to my editor and open the style.css file and just toggle this window on the right side of the screen. Down here I'm going to create a command, add user and update user template, because I'm going to use the same styling for update and add user form. So I'm going to first select the form title class, then specify margin, top is going to be 2em. Just after that, I'm going to specify here dot form title, and then select the h2 heading tag. Padding is going to be 0.5 em to the top and bottom. Just down here, I'm going to select the new user class and then specify max width 786 pixel and margin is going to be auto. Save the changes. Just down here, I'm going to select the update user ID and then select form group class. Then I'm going to specify margin 0.4 em to the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. Save the changes. This will add some margin between these elements. As you know, I'm using the same form for the add user as well. So I'm going to copy this selector, paste it down here and change this update user to add user like this. Just out of that, down here I'm going to say update user, and then I'm going to select form group, and then I'm going to select input of the type text, and to this input tags I'm going to specify width 100%, then specify padding, which is 0.6 em to the top and bottom and 1 em to the left and right. Then I'm going to specify margin, which is 0.5 em to the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. Then I'm going to specify border, which is 1 pixel solid, and specify border to it like this. Save the changes. This will change the border of this text box. Just down here, I'm going to specify font family to this text boxes. So I'm going to copy this this Bordeaux font family and specify that to this text box. Just down here, I'm going to specify font size 1 em and border radius is going to be 0.2 em. Save the changes and this will something look like this. Just out of that, as you know, I'm going to specify the same styling to the add user as well. So I'm going to copy this selector, specify comma here and paste the selector again. And instead of update user, I'm going to say here add user. Save the changes. Down here, I'm going to specify styling to this radio buttons. So I'm going to paste the selector again. And instead of input type text, here I'm going to select radio. And I'm going to specify margin 1 em to the top and bottom and 2 em to the left and right. Save the changes. So this will add some margin to these radio buttons. Just after that, I'm going to apply the styling to the add user as well. Add user. Save the changes. And now if we just take a look at this form, then this radio buttons is very ordinary. I want to specify some styling to it to make this form more attractive. So I'm going to just back to my style.css and down here I'm going to apply some styling to these radio buttons. So here I'm going to create CSS command and specify adding style to radio buttons. So here I'm going to first select radio, then select input, and it is a type of radio. So in the single quote, I'm going to say radio. Just after that, I'm going to specify position, absolute, and opacity is going to be 0. Save the changes. This will remove the radio buttons right from here. Just down here, I'm going to select this selector and just add a before content to it. So here I'm going to say radio label and add before pseudo selector. So here I'm going to say content, specify empty string, then specify background, which is border btn. I'm going to specify this color border btn. Then I'm going to specify border radius 100%. Border is going to be 1 pixel solid border. I'm going to call my variable border. Just out of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this class to the label first, so I can see the result here. So I'm going to just back to the add user, and as you can notice, I have here a radio button with label. So I'm going to specify here a class. So instead of this text light, I'm going to specify here radio label like this. Don't forget to specify to this gender as well, like this. Save the changes. As you can notice, I have the result something like this. Back to the style.css, and down here I'm going to add styling to this radio buttons. So just out of this border, I'm going to specify display inline block. Width is going to be 1 em and height is going to be 1 em. Then I'm going to add position, which is relative, and top is going to be -0 em. Just out of that, I'm going to specify margin right 0.5 em and vertical alignment is going to be top. Save the changes. Just after that, cursor is going to be pointer, text alignment, center, and then I'm going to add a transition to this radio button. So here I'm going to add WebKit transition and select the CSS property. So I'm going to select here all 250 millisecond and specify function is. Then specify the transition property and specify here all 250 millisecond is. Just down here, I'm going to first select this selector and paste it down here like this. And when I click on this radio button, so I'm going to call here an event check. So when I click on this radio button, I want to select this radio label before pseudo selector and specify background color, and I'm going to specify background color to this radio button, and then specify box shadow inset 0.004 pixel, and then specify a simple light gray color to it. Save the changes. Just out of that, I'm going to copy this selector, paste it down here. When I focus on this radio button, I want to select this before pseudo selector and then specify outline none, and border color is going to be this one. Just after that, I want to disable the check property. So here I'm going to select this selector like this, paste it down here, And if the radio button is disabled, I want to select this before pseudo selector and then specify box shadow, inset 0004 pixel, and then I'm going to specify this color. So I'm going to copy this property and specify that here. Just after that, I'm going to specify border color and specify the hex value here, as well as I'm going to specify background color and specify the same hex value. Save the changes. And now let me just check my radio buttons. When I click on the radio buttons, oops, nothing is happening. This is because if you back to your add user, here you can notice this input type radio and this label is not connected. So how do I connect both these elements? I can connect them using ID. So I'm going to specify here ID radio 2. If you want, you can specify any ID to this radio button. But keep in mind this ID and this 4 need to be equal. So I'm going to specify radio 2 to this label and to this input type radio. I'm going to do the same, but this time I'm going to specify ID here, radio 3, and 4 is going to be radio 3. Do the same for this gender as well. So here I'm going to specify ID radio 4, 4 is going to be radio 4. Then this radio button is going to be ID radio 5, and this became radio 5. Save the changes and let me just click on these radio buttons. As you can notice, this is now working. Just after that, let me just style this button. So I'm going to just back to my style.css, and down here I'm going to style this button. Down here I'm going to select first update user, then select the form group class, and then select bdn class. At the same time, I'm going to select the add user as well, like this, add user, and here I'm going to specify width 100%, then specify padding 0.9 em, 9 em to the top and bottom and 1 em to the left and right. Then specify background color, and I'm going to select this background color, specify that here. Then I'm going to select border, which is none, font family, and I'm going to specify this font family, this PT Sans, like this. Just down here I'm going to specify font size 1 em, cursor is going to be pointer, and border radius 0.2 em, and margin is going to be 0.5 em to the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. Save the changes, and as you can notice, the button is now successfully ready. Let me just add some hover effect on this button. So let me just copy this selector, paste it down here, and add hover effect on it, hover, and then I'm going to specify background color. I want to add dark color when I hover on this button, and then color is going to be border. Now, as you can notice, the styling of this template is now completely ready. Next, I'm going to show you how to convert this HTML into EJS template engine. Now, let's understand how to convert this .html template into EJS template engine. So I'm going to just expand this editor and open the index.ejs. Here you can notice I have the footer and this header. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the index.html, and here is the main section of this website. So I'm going to copy this main section and paste it between this footer and this header, right here, like this. And just after that, I'm going to grab all the content of this table data and put it in a separate partial file, so I can manage it very easily. I'm going to grab this table row like this, right from here, save the changes, open the Explorer tab, and here I'm going to create a new file inside this include folder. I'm going to create a new file with name show.ejs, and inside this file I'm going to paste all this content like this. Save the changes, and let me just back to my index.ejs, copy this EJS syntax and paste it here like this. And instead of footer, I'm going to say here show. Save the changes, open the terminal, and I'm going to start the server, npm start. This will just start the server on localhost 3000. Let me just open it. As you can notice, the styling is not actually applied to this template, because if you back to the header, I don't have the style here. So just out of this title down here, I'm going to add styling. So here I'm going to say link and specify here style.css. So here I'm going to say css /style.css. CSS is the prefix of this style.css. As you can notice here, if we open the server.js, we specify here CSS. This is the prefix of this asset CSS folder. Just for that, don't forget to link this Font Awesome website. So I'm going to copy this Font Awesome website link, this CDN, and paste it before this link tag like this. Save the changes, back to the website and reload it. As you can notice, the style is now successfully applied to this project. Just for that, what I want, when I click on this new user, I want to navigate user to the add user form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file inside this views folder and name this file add user.ejs. And here inside this add user, I'm going to put all the code of this add user.html file, this one. So I'm going to first copy this heading section and the footer section of this website. So I'm going to just copy this heading, paste it inside add user like this, copy the footer, paste it inside the add user like this. So once I have the header and footer of this website, let me just put the main section of this website. So I'm going to open the add user, copy this main section and paste it inside this add user.ejs. And now I'm going to grab this form and put it in a separate partial file. So I'm going to grab this form like this. Inside this include, I'm going to create a partial file with the name form.ejs. And here I'm going to paste this form. Save the changes. Back to the add user. I'm going to copy this EJS syntax. And here I'm going to add that EJS syntax. So here I'm going to first add HTML comment and say add user form. I'm going to paste the EJS syntax and call form.ejs file. Save the changes. Back to the index.ejs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new route and render this add user file. So I'm going to just back to my server.js, copy this get request, paste it down here, and for the add user, I'm going to render this add user template. So here I'm going to say add user. Make sure the file name is exactly same. So I'm going to specify this name and render it. Back to the project, and when you click on this new user, this will navigate you to the add user. Now just for that, let me just back to my root route. So I'm going to click on this all user. This will just navigate us to the root route of this website. When I click on this edit button, I want to navigate user to the update page of this website. As you can notice here, in this website, I don't have the update page. Let me create it. In the views, I'm going to create a new file with name update user.ejs. And I'm going to put all the code of this add user inside this update user file. So I'm going to copy all this code like this and paste it inside this update user file. And I'm going to change this text to update user. And I'm going to change this as well. Use the below form to update an account. Just after that, I'm not going to use this add user form inside this update user. So I'm going to copy all this code and paste it right here. Save the changes. Back to the form.ejs, and as you can notice, inside this update.user, I have the ID update user. Inside this form.ejs, I have the same ID update user. I'm going to change it to add user. So once I specify add user, you can notice in the style.css, I specify the same styling to both these forms, to the update and to this add user form. Now, just after that, as I said earlier, when I click on this button, I want to navigate user to the update page. So let me first close the unwanted files from here. Let me just back to the show.ejs, and here I specify the hash inside this update button. Let me just specify here / and specify update user. Save the changes, back to the server.ejs and create a new route for update. Copy this get request, paste it down here and specify here update user. And instead of add user, here I'm going to specify update user. I'm going to specify this file name, update user. Save the changes and reload the browser, and when you click on this edit button, as you can notice, this will navigate you to the update page. Let me just back to the root route, and when you click on this new user, here you can add a new user, and from this edit button you can edit the user, or you can say you can update the user information. Now once we complete the styling and convert all the HTML into EJS, let me just delete these index files. So I'm going to delete this, add user.html and index.html. Let me just minimize these folders. Now once you understand how to work with the client side of this project, next we're going to start working on the server side of this project. So in the next lecture, we're going to create a different route and connect the MongoDB database to this project. Once we understand how to work with client side of this application, let's take a look at how to work with server side. So I'm going to open my editor and I'm going to just create the server side of this application. So as you can notice here in this server.js file, I have these routers. I'm going to separate this router from this server.js file and create a dedicated router file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new router file inside this router folder. You can notice here I have this router folder inside this server folder. So I'm going to just click on this router, and here I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to click on this new file icon and name this file router.js. And in this file I'm going to create my routers. So I'm going to grab all this router like this, cut it from the server.js and paste it right here like this. And just out of that, as you know, I don't have this app variable. So inside this router I'm going to say constant express is equal to and require the express module like this. And just out of that, I'm not going to create here constant app and then specify the express application, because this statement will create a new app. So what I want, instead of creating a new app here, I'm going to call a method of express. So here, instead of this constant app, I'm going to say constant route is equal to express dot router. This method allows us to create different router in a separate file. So instead of app, I'm going to use this route variable like this. So now you can import this file inside server.js and use these routes. Let me just save the changes, save this file back to the server.js, and down here I'm going to create a command and say load routers, and here I'm going to say app.use and specify a root path, and to this root path I'm going to require this file. So here I'm going to say require in the single quote, specify dot / server. Inside this server I have routes, and inside this route I have router. Just out of that, save this file as well and back to the router.js. You can notice here I just created 3 routes here, but I didn't export it. So let me first export this route so I can use it in this server.js. So down here I'm going to say module.exports is equal to route. So now I can use this route variable in server.js. Save the changes, back to the server.js, save this file as well and reload the application. As you can notice, the application is working fine. Now let me just back to my server and back to the router.js file. You can notice here I have these callback functions inside this router.js. Instead of creating these callback functions inside this parenthesis of this get method, I'm going to separate this callback function so I can maintain it. So inside these services, I'm going to create a new service for this router. So inside these services, I'm going to create a new file and name this file render.js. This file is going to allow us to render different files using router. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back to the router.js, and as you can notice, the first route is going to render the index file. So inside this render.js, here I'm going to say exports dot home route, and I'm going to specify a callback function. So here I'm going to say request and response parameter and call an arrow function like this. Now this export keyword is going to export this function so I can use it in other files. So inside this function, I'm going to just grab this response.render and paste it here like this. So I'm going to say here response.render and render the index file. Save the changes, back to the router.js, And here, instead of this callback function, I'm going to call this home route function. So I'm going to just first require this file. So I'm going to say constant services is equal to require, and here I'm going to just pass services render.js, this file. Just for that, I'm going to use these services instead of this callback function. So I'm going to get rid of this callback function right from here like this, specify comma to specify the second argument to this method, and then I'm going to say services dot home routes. That's it. Save the changes, and now when you reload the browser, it will completely work fine. So now you can notice here, this route is now very easy to understand. This is the route path, and I'm going to call this function when the route is matched. Let me just add here a description for this route. So here I'm going to just add some documentation for this route, @description root route, or you can specify here home route as well, and the method is going to be get. Just for that, I'm going to do the same for this route as well and for this route as well. So I'm going to back to my render.js file, and down here I'm going to say exports dot add user, and I'm going to just specify a callback function, request and response parameter, and inside it I'm going to render a file. As you know, here I'm going to just render this add user. So I'm going to copy it, paste it here. Just for that, here I'm going to say exports dot update user is equal to call the request and response parameter with arrow, and then I'm going to just render this update file. Save the changes, back to the router.js, and instead of these callback functions, I'm going to just specify here services dot add user, and this became services dot update user. That's it. Save the changes, save this file as well, back to the browser and reload it. And let me just check my other pages as well. When I click on this new user, this will open the add user route, and if I click on this edit button, this will open the update user route. Now just for that, let me just back to router.js, copy this documentation, paste it here, and this route is for add users, and this is the type of get request on add user. Do the same for this last route, and to the description I'm going to specify for update user, and this is going to be the get request, and route is going to be update user. Now once you understand how to create routing in this application, let's take a look at how to connect the MongoDB to this application and create the RESTful API. Now let's understand how to connect the MongoDB to the project. So I'm going to open a new tab in my browser, and here I'm going to say MongoDB. I'm going to search for MongoDB, and here I have the result, www.mongodb.com. I'm going to head on to this website, and from here I'm going to connect my application to MongoDB. In the previous lecture, I already explained how to work with MongoDB locally. I created different documents and collection using Mongo shell. Now because we are working on a big project, I'm not going to store all the data in the local host, because if accidentally my hard disk crash, I could lose all my data. So instead of storing all this data inside my hard disk, I'm going to store it on cloud. When you open the mongodb.com, you have the MongoDB Atlas where you can store all your data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this start free, and here you can notice you have MongoDB Atlas. From here you can store your data on cloud database. MongoDB Atlas is fully managed cloud database developed by the same people that build MongoDB. Atlas handles all the complexity of deploying, managing, and handling your deployments on a cloud service provider of your choice. So instead of working on localhost, we're going to work on cloud database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify my information and create a new account on MongoDB. So I'm going to click on this sign up button of Google and sign in with my Gmail account. Once I sign in with MongoDB Atlas, you would have the result something like this. If you're creating an account for the first time, MongoDB Atlas will ask you to specify name of your organization. You can specify your individual name here and proceed. Once you proceed, you will have the result something like this. Here you can create a new project and create a new cluster. Cluster is going to manage all your cloud data. So what I'm going to do is, here I'm going to click on this new project button to create a new project. I'm going to click on it and specify name for this project. I'm going to choose name CURD. I'm going to specify name to this project CURD and click on this next button. And then I'm going to add member and set permissions. I'm not going to specify any member or add any permission here. Instead, I am the owner of this database. So I'm going to just click on this create project. So this will just take few seconds to create a new project. So here you can notice the project is now created with the name CURD. And now let's create a new cluster. So I'm going to just click on this build a cluster. And here you can notice we have different cluster. I'm going to use the free one. So I'm going to click on this create a free cluster. Now here you need to specify the cloud provider. I'm going to use AWS and I'm going to choose my nearest server. I'm in Asia, so I'm going to choose Mumbai. Then I'm going to leave everything as it is and click on create cluster. Now this will just take few minutes to create a new cluster. Once your cluster is successfully created, click on this database access from the security right here and create a database user so we can access the database. So I'm going to click on this add new database user. So I'm going to create a new user with authentication. So here I'm going to specify admin and specify password admin123 and click on this add user button. This will create the admin user with admin123 password. And here you can notice we have resources, all resources. So this will just allows us to access all the resources of the database. You can edit the user as well from these buttons. Or if you want, you can create and delete the database from these buttons as well. Now just out of that, I'm going to click on this network access and add my IP address so I can access this database. So I'm going to click on this add IP address and here I'm going to click on this allow access from anywhere. I don't want to show my IP address, so I'm not going to click on this add current IP address. I'm going to click on this allow from anywhere just like this and click on this confirm. So this will just allows me to access this database from any localhost. Just wait a minute. So once you have the status active, you will only be able to connect your cluster from this list. Once you specify the database access and network access, let's back to the cluster. And from this cluster, I'm going to click on this connect button to connect this cluster to my web application. So I'm going to click on this connect and click on this connect your application. Here you can notice you have the connection string. Using this connection string, I'm going to connect this application to my project. So I'm going to copy this connection string by clicking on this copy button and close this window. Back to my project and open the config.env file. And here I'm going to create a new variable with name Mongo URI and specify this MongoDB URL like this. And don't forget to specify password and database name. So I'm going to get rid of this password field right from here and I'm going to specify my password admin123. So this is my password of this admin user. Just out of that, I'm going to specify the database name. So I'm going to get rid of this angle brackets and this DB name and specify the database name. I'm going to specify name users. So this is my database name. If you want, you can specify any name to this database. That doesn't matter. Now, once I import this connection string in this application, let me connect the MongoDB database to the application. I'm going to save this file and close it. Just out of that, inside this server, inside this database folder, I'm going to create a new file and name this file connection.js. And inside this file, I'm going to make the MongoDB connection. So I'm going to first say here constant mongoose is equal to and require the mongoose module. Using mongoose module, we can connect the MongoDB database to the application. So here I'm going to say constant connect db. I'm going to create here a function connect db and call sync and await function. So here I'm going to say async, specify the parentheses and call the arrow function. So I'm going to just create a synchronous function using async and await. Just out of that, here I'm going to call try and catch. Inside this try, I'm going to make MongoDB connection. So here I'm going to create a command and say MongoDB connection string. Just down here, I'm going to say constant connection is equal to call the await function like this and say mongoose dot connect. I'm going to call a method of mongoose which is mongoose connect. Just out of that, in the parentheses, I'm going to say process dot env dot and then I'm going to call this variable mongo URI, this one right here, just like this. So now as you can notice, I'm going to just pass this variable name. Just out of that, I'm going to specify here comma to specify second argument, and in the curly braces, I'm going to just stop warnings in the console when I use MongoDB connection. So here I'm going to say use new URL parser true. Then I'm going to call a new property called use unified topology, and I'm going to just make this property true. Just out of that, I'm going to say use find and modify false and use create index true. So these properties will stop unwanted warnings in the console. Now just out of that, down here, just after this connection, here I'm going to say console.log, and using the backtick operator, I'm going to say MongoDB connected and specify the connection string. So I'm going to call dollar in the curly braces. I'm going to say con.connection.host. And just out of that, if there is any problem while connection, I'm going to say console.log and print the error message and exit from this process. So here I'm going to say process.exit and specify 1, which is true. And don't forget to export this function. So down here, I'm going to say module.exports is equal to connect db. Just out of that, back to the server.js, and let me just call this connection here. I'm going to just require the MongoDB file. So here I'm going to say constant connect db is equal to and require the connection file. So here I'm going to say server database, and then I'm going to select the connection file, this one. And using this connect db, I'm going to call this function connect db. So just down here, just after this Morgan, right down here, I'm going to add a comment and say MongoDB connection, and just add here connect db and specify parentheses. So I'm going to just call this function inside this server.js file. Let me just open my terminal and save this file. When I save this file, you can notice I have the console message MongoDB connected, and this is the cluster hostname. So using this message, this is confirmed that the MongoDB is successfully connected to this application. So once you understand how to create the MongoDB connection, let me show you how to create API and make CRUD operations. Now, once you understand how to create the successful connection of MongoDB, let me just show you how to create a scheme in MongoDB. But let me first close these unwanted files right from here. And now let me just open the module folder, and inside it I'm going to create the MongoDB scheme. So I'm going to create a new file and name this file model.js, and inside this model I'm going to create a MongoDB scheme. So here I'm going to say constant mongoose is equal to and require the mongoose module. Just like that, here I'm going to say var scheme is equal to and create a new instance of mongoose scheme. So I'm going to say here new mongoose scheme. Mongoose scheme allows you to define a shape and content of the document. So here we have mongoose scheme, and in the parentheses, in the curly braces, I'm going to specify shape of the document. So here I'm going to first specify name and specify curly braces, and inside it I'm going to specify type, which is string. Then I'm going to specify required true. Just out of that, specify comma here. Email is going to be of the type string. Then required is going to be true, and unique is going to be true. The email should be unique of all the users. Then I'm going to say here gender is going to be string, and status is going to be string. So this is a very simple scheme of MongoDB, or you can say this is a very simple MongoDB model. Just like that, down here I'm going to say constant user db is equal to mongoose.model. I'm going to call a method of mongoose model, and inside this model I'm going to specify the document name. So here I'm going to say user db. So you can specify any name to this document. I'm going to specify document name user db, and then specify shape of the document. So as you know, I have this scheme variable and this is the shape of my document. So I'm going to pass here scheme. Just out of that, don't forget to export this module. So here I'm going to say module.exports is equal to userdb. So once the model is successfully created, let me just create the controller of this website. Using controller, I'm going to just make select, update, delete and create records. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this controller folder and create a new file inside it. And I'm going to name this file controller.js. If you want, you can name this file anything. Inside this controller, I'm going to first require this module so I can use it in this controller file. So I'm going to say here var user db is equal to and say required, and in the single quote I'm going to specify module and then specify model.js file. So I'm going to just require this scheme inside this controller file so I can use it inside this controller. Just after that, here I'm going to create my first API create request. So here I'm going to create a command create and save new user. So I'm going to just create here a function. So here I'm going to say exports dot create is equal to specify request and response parameter and specify arrow function to it. And here inside this create function, I'm going to save a new user. So I'm going to first back to my router.js and inside it, I'm going to first require this controller. So here I'm going to say constant controller is equal to, and using require, I'm going to require the controller file controller.js. Just after that, just down here, I'm going to create my API route. So here I'm going to create a command API. So here I'm going to first create this create request. So in the route, I'm going to say route.post. To create and add new user, I'm going to use post method. So I'm going to call post method in the single quote. I'm going to specify /API, specify / and say here users. So this is the route path of post request. Just after that, I'm going to specify comma and say controller dot create. So I'm going to call this method when the route is matched with this post method. Save the changes, back to the controller, and inside this function, I'm going to save and create a new user. Now, let me just do the same for update, delete, and find. So down here, I'm going to create a command and say retrieve and return all users. Or I'm going to use the same method to retrieve and return a single user. So here I'm going to create a function. So I'm going to say here exports dot find and specify request and response parameter. So I'm going to use this function to retrieve all the user, as well as I'm going to use the same function to retrieve only a single user. I'm going to show you that later in this tutorial. Just down here, I'm going to create a new command and say update a new identified user by user ID. I'm going to update the user, so I'm going to create here a function exports.update is equal to call the request and response parameter just like this. So I'm going to use this method to update the user, and just down here I'm going to create a new command, and here I'm going to say delete a user with specified user ID in the request. So here I'm going to say exports.delete is equal to and call the request and response parameter with arrow function. Save the changes, back to the router.js file, and here let me just duplicate this statement like this, and instead of this post request, this time I'm going to make get request. So here I'm going to say get, and I'm going to make this get request on this route, and I'm going to change this callback function. So here I'm going to say controller dot find. So when I make a get request on this route, I want to execute this find method. Just after that, I'm going to just say here route dot put. I'm going to just call a put method of HTTP on this path, and then I'm going to just pass a parameter to this path. So here I'm going to specify /:ID. So when I call this put method, I need to specify value to this ID variable. And now instead of this controller.create, I'm going to say here controller.update. So I'm going to call this update method when the route is matched. At the end, I'm going to say route.delete. I'm going to call the HTTP delete method, and I'm going to pass ID with this delete route. So here I'm going to say /:ID. Just out of that, I'm going to specify callback function controller.delete. So this is how we can simply create an API for this application. Save the changes, save the controller file as well. And next, I'm going to show you how to create these functions and get all the information from the database. Now, let's understand how to make CRUD operation using MongoDB database. I'm going to first create a new user using this create callback function. So inside this create function, I'm going to first validate the request. So here I'm going to create a command and say validate request. So how can I validate the request? So here I'm going to say if !request.body, if when the request make a post request with empty body, I want to just send a response with a status 400 and then send a message. So I'm going to say here curly braces, and here I'm going to say message content cannot be empty, and just return from this function. So here I'm going to say return. So if the user make post request with empty body, I'm going to just return from this callback function. So whenever the user make a post request, you need to specify body of that post request. As you know, when you make a post request using a form, all the data of the form is stored in the body of the request object, and using this body we can access all the form data. So down here I'm going to just create a new user. So we need to create a new instance of the user DD scheme. So here I'm going to create a command and say new user. So here I'm going to create constant user is equal to new user DB, and in the parentheses inside the curly braces I'm going to specify value to this document. So I'm going to specify value to this name, email, gender and status. So inside this controller, inside this curly braces, I'm going to first specify name, and then here I'm going to say request dot body dot name. So when the user make post request, I can access this name property from the body. Just out of that, I'm going to say here email request dot body dot email. Just down here, I'm going to say gender. Gender is going to be request dot body dot gender. And just after that, I'm going to say status is going to be request dot body dot status. So as you can notice here, the data is going to match to this model. So inside this controller, I'm going to just store this data and create a new instance of UserDB model and store it in this variable. Just after that, just down here, I'm going to save this data in the database. So I'm going to just create a comment here, and here I'm going to say save user in the database. So I'm going to call here user, and here I'm going to call different methods. So I'm going to use chaining system to call different methods. So here I'm going to say dot save. This method is going to save this data in the MongoDB database, and then here to this save method you need to pass your object. So here I'm going to pass this user. I want to save this user data in the MongoDB database, so I'm going to pass this user data here. Just out of that, specify dot and call the promise then method, and inside it I'm going to specify data, and inside this callback function I'm going to say response dot send, and I'm going to send this data. And if this promise return error, I'm going to just catch it using this catch method with error. So I'm going to call here a callback function and say response dot status, and then I'm going to specify the error status score 500 and then send it using curly braces. And inside it I'm going to say message, and here I'm going to say error dot message. If this variable return nothing, I'm going to just specify default value. Some error occurred while creating a create operation. Don't forget to specify semicolons here. That's it. Save the changes, and now here you have your create callback function. Now let me explain this code and show you how to execute it. So I'm going to first check. So if the user make post request without body, I'm going to just exit from this method. And if we have body of the post, I'm going to just get all the content and create an instance of this model. So once I have the instance of this UserDB model, I'm going to just save it inside the database using this save method. Just after that, I'm going to call a promise then, and then return this save data to the user. And if there is any error inside this statement, I'm going to call this catch method. Now let me just test this API. So I'm going to open the Postman API tool to test this API. It is always a best practice to test your API before working with it. So I'm going to open the Postman. Postman is a free tool for testing APIs. If you don't know about what is Postman, then you can check my dedicated video on it. Postman is an API testing tool that helps us to test the APIs. If you don't have Postman in your local system, just open your browser and just head on to Postman. Just search for Postman and head on www.postman.com. And from this website, you can download the Postman for your local system. I already have the Postman installed in my local system, so I'm not going to install it again. So I'm going to close my tab and open the Postman again. And now I'm going to just create a new tab here. And then here you can notice I have the request type. So we have different request type here, the requested URL and the send button. So as you know, if you just back to your router.js, we are going to make a post request on this URL. And this is going to call this create callback function. So I'm going to open my Postman and first select the post request. Then specify the URL. So as you know, if you back to your browser, this is your URL of your application. Just copy it and back to the Postman and specify that URL right here. And just out of that, specify this API path, this one, and paste it right here like this. And just out of that, as you know, we need to specify body to this post method. If you just make this send request, then you will get an error message, because as you can notice here in the controller, I just added if we don't have body to this post request. I just wanted to exit from this post request. So let me just add body of this post request. So I'm going to click on this body, and here I'm going to select the XWWW form URL encoded. This is the URL encoded data I want to send with this post request. And then here I'm going to pass body to this method. So in the key, I'm going to first specify name, specify value here. So I'm going to just specify name to the user, which is Ashok Talwar. Then I'm going to specify email. Just out of that, I'm going to specify gender. Gender is going to be male, and status is going to be inactive. So what I want to store this data inside my MongoDB database. So I'm going to pass this data to this body and just click on this send button to add this data in the MongoDB database. But before I click on this send button, you can notice here, if I open the controller, here I have the MongoDB scheme. Inside this scheme, I have name, email, gender, and status. When I make this post request, I'm going to pass this data to these variables so I can store it in this MongoDB database. So let me just click on this send button and store this data inside this database. When I click on it, you can notice I'm going to have the result something like this. Here I have the unique ID, then we have the name, email, gender, and status. So as you can notice, we have the successful 200 message from this response. So as you can notice, we successfully inserted the data inside the MongoDB database. Let me just back to my MongoDB database. So let me first open my cluster and click on these collections. Here you can notice inside this collection, I have my data. In the collection, you can find the database name, users, and the document name, UserDBs. So you can notice we successfully make the create request. Now, once you understand how to create a user and save the data in MongoDB, let's understand how to find, or you can say, how to get the user using get method. Now, let's take a look at how to read the data from the MongoDB database. As you can notice, I'm using this find method to read the data from the database. So I'm going to use this find method of this controller file. So I'm going to open the controller.js, and here I have this find method. Inside it, I'm going to read the data from the database. So I'm going to first get the data from the database and return as a response. Here I'm going to first say userdb dot find. I'm going to call a find method of userdb object, and then I'm going to call a then method of promise. So here I'm going to say dot then, and then I'm going to pass parameter user and in the callback function I'm going to say response.send user, just like this. And then I'm going to call the catch method to return the error message if there is any error inside this statement. So here I'm going to say response.status, and status code is going to be 500, which is the error code, and then send the message object like this. So here I'm going to say error.message, and if this variable is not available, let me just send the default value, which is error occurred while retrieving user information. Save the changes, open the postman, and now I'm going to make get request on this user route. So as you can notice, I have this get request and I'm going to specify this URL. So I'm going to open my postman, and here I'm going to select the get request, and this get request is posted on API users. And then I'm going to just back to my params and just click on this send button. When I click on it, as you can notice, I'm going to have the data of my database. Because we have only one data inside this database, I'm only going to have one record as a response. So this find method will return all the records of the database as a response. Just for that, let me show you how to update the value of the user using this update callback function. So here inside this update method, I'm going to just first say if the request.body is not available, then I'm going to just return a response with a status code 400, and then I'm going to return a send method with message object, and then I'm going to specify here data to update cannot be empty. And just for that, down here, if the body of the put request, this put request is empty, I will return from this callback function. Just for that, down here I'm going to say constant id is equal to request dot params dot id. So I'm going to just get this id value from this request using this param object. Now in Express, there are two types of route parameters, the URL parameters and query parameters. This is the type of URL parameters. We created a variable in the URL. So this is what we call the URL parameter. When we make put request, I need to specify value to this ID parameter. So when I specify value to this ID parameter, so this value is going to specify to this ID variable using this statement. So when I make a request with ID value, the value is going to pass to this parameter object and to this ID variable. So I can get that value and store it in this ID variable. The second type of parameter is query parameters. I will show you how to work with query parameters after a few minutes. But just for now, once I have the URL parameter inside this ID, just down here I'm going to say userdb dot find by ID and update. I'm going to call this method find by ID and update, and inside this method I'm going to first specify the ID which I want to update. So I'm going to specify here ID, I'm going to pass this variable, then specify here comma, and then I'm going to pass request dot body. I'm going to pass the data which I want to update, and then here I'm going to pass curly braces and say use find and modify false. Just for that, down here I'm going to call promises. So here I'm going to say then, and inside this then I'm going to pass parameter data, and I'm going to say here if we don't have data, then I'm going to just return a response dot status 404, and then I'm going to send a response. So here I'm going to just send, in the curly braces I'm going to call a message key, and in the backtick operator I'm going to say cannot update user with, then specify the ID, and then I'm going to say dot maybe user not found. Just after that, just out of this if statement, I'm going to say here else if we have this data parameter, I'm going to say here response.send and send this data. I'm going to just send this updated data with this statement. Just down here, if there is any error in this then method, I'm going to just catch it. So down here I'm going to say catch error, call the function, and here I'm going to say response.status. Status is going to be 500, and then I'm going to call send method with message key, and here I'm going to say error update user information. Save the changes, So once I have my update callback function, let me just check it. So as you can notice here in the router, I have this put request. So I want to make this put request on this route. When I make this put request, I need to specify value to this ID parameter. So I can get it inside this ID variable and pass to this object. So I'm going to just open the postman, and here I'm going to first get this ID. So I'm going to copy this ID and I'm going to select put request, this one. Just out of that, I'm going to make a request on API users, and as you know, in the router I have this ID parameter, so I need to pass value to it. So here I'm going to specify / and paste this ID. Just out of that, I'm going to back to the body of this request, and now I want to update this status of this user. So I'm going to uncheck gender, email and name, and I'm going to just say here inactive, and I'm going to make this active. Now once I specify body, once I specify the parameter value, let me just make this put request. So I'm going to just select the ID using this ID parameter and update the status of the ID and make it active. Right now the status of the user is inactive. I'm going to make it active and update the value of this status property. So I'm going to just click on this send button to update this status property. When I click on the send button, as you can notice, I'm going to have the status active. So the postman will make put request on this route with this ID and update the status property to active. So this is how you can update the value in the MongoDB database. Now just out of that, let me show you how to delete the record from the database. Now deleting records from the user database is super easy. Inside this delete callback function, I'm going to first get the user ID. So here I'm going to say constant ID is equal to request.params.id. So I'm going to get the user ID using this variable. So when I make a delete request, I need to specify ID of the user. Just out of that, here I'm going to say userdb dot find by ID and delete. I'm going to call this method and pass ID as a parameter to this method. This method is going to return promise, so I'm going to get that promise using .then method and specify here parameter data and say here if we don't have data, then I'm going to say response.status and say 404. Then I'm going to say here send, and in the curly braces I'm going to return the error message. So I'm going to say here message and say cannot delete with ID, and then I'm going to pass here ID variable and say here maybe ID is wrong. Just out of that, if we have valid data, then I'm going to say here else statement, and inside this else I'm going to say response.send, and then I'm going to send a message. So here I'm going to say message and say user was deleted successfully. At the end, just after that, just down here, if this then method return any error, I'm going to catch that using this catch method and say here error, and here I'm going to say response.status and specify 500 as a status code and send error message in the curly braces. I'm going to say message could not delete user with ID is equal to, and then I'm going to concatenate the ID variable like this. If you want, you can use here backtick operator as well to print this value. That doesn't matter. Just out of that, I'm going to specify here semicolons like this and save the changes. Save this file as well. And now if you want to delete the data from the MongoDB database, you need to call the delete HTTP method with this URL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first open the postman, and let me first add a new value inside a database. So I'm going to make a post request and just specify here API users, and then in the body I'm going to pass name, email and gender. Inside name I'm going to specify user1, and in the email I'm going to specify user@gmail.com. Here I'm going to specify gender, which is female, and status is going to be active. So now I'm going to just pass this data to the post request and create a new record inside my MongoDB database. I'm going to click on this send button to create a new record. So this will just create this record inside MongoDB database, So let me first back to my MongoDB database and refresh it. When I refresh my collections, here I have two database records. This is my first record and this is the second one. I'm going to delete this second record. So I'm going to open the postman, and now I'm going to copy this ID, and just out of that I'm going to just click on this post and select the delete method. And here inside this URL I'm going to pass value to the ID variable. So I'm going to specify /, then specify ID, this one, in the URL, and then back to the params. And now I'm going to click on this send button to delete this record from the MongoDB database. As you know, when I make a request, this ID is going to pass to this variable and pass to this object, and then this statement will delete this record from MongoDB database. Now let me just make this request. So I'm going to click on this send button. When I click on it, I'm going to have a message, user was deleted. Now let me just check my database. So let me refresh it. As you can notice, the second record is now deleted from my database. So you can see how easy it is to delete the record from your MongoDB database. Now once you understand how to work with create, update and delete, and how to find all the users from the database, let me just show you how to get and retrieve a single user from the database. When you make a GET request on this route, this will return all the users. But what I want to retrieve a specific user from the database. Instead of returning all the users, I want to return only a single user from the database. Now, to retrieve the single user from the database, I'm going to use this same find method. If you want, you can create a new function to retrieve the single user from the database. When you create a new function, you need to create a new route for that. So instead of creating a new route, I'm going to just use this same route to get the single user and multiple users. So inside this find method, I'm going to just get the query parameters and get a single user from the database. So let me first add a few users inside my database. As you know, I only have a single record inside my database. You can notice here. So let me first add a few records inside this database using post method. So I'm going to just make some post request and add some users inside this database. So let me first refresh my database. As you can notice, I have a few records inside this database. Let me show you all my database records. So here I'm going to say get, and I'm going to just make get request to this API users, and I'm going to just make a request. You can notice here, this will just return all the records of my database. But what I want to just get a specific record from this database. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to just back to my find method, and here I'm going to just pass query parameter when I make a get request to this route. So when I make a get request to this route, I'm going to just return a query parameter, and then I'm going to get that query parameter and pass inside this callback function and get a specific user. So up here I'm going to say if request.query.id, if I have this ID parameter of the query, then I'm going to return the specific user. Otherwise, I'm going to return all the users. So in the else statement, I'm going to put this code like this. Inside this if statement, if I have query parameter to this request, I'm going to just get that query parameter. So here I'm going to say constant ID is equal to request.query.id and store it in the ID variable. And here I'm going to say user db dot find by ID and pass this ID variable here. Just out of that, I'm going to call promise then method, pass data variable, and here I'm going to say if I don't have any data, then return a response with status 404, and I'm going to just send a response. So I'm going to say here send, in the curly braces I'm going to say message, and in the double quote I'm going to say not found user with ID, and then specify the ID variable. Just down here in the else statement, I'm going to simply say response.send and send this data. And if this statement return an error message, I'm going to just catch it. So here I'm going to say catch error and say here response.status, return the 500 status code dot send, and in the curly braces I'm going to say message and return the error message. So here I'm going to say error retrieving user with ID, and then I'm going to concatenate my ID like this. Save the changes, and now open the Postman. As you know, when you make a GET request to this URL, this will return all the users. I want to get a specific user from these records. So for example, if I want to get this record, I'm going to just copy this ID, and in the params, I'm going to create a key and pass this value here like this. So you can notice here how this URL look like. Now I'm going to just create here key and value pair. So this is the key ID and this is the value of this ID key. I'm going to access this ID using this query ID statement, and I'm going to store the value of this ID inside this ID variable, and then I'm going to pass this value to this find by ID method. So when I click on this send button, I'm going to have the specific record. As you can notice here, this will just send me a specific record from my database. And now if I remove this ID from this URL, you can get all your records. This is how you can retrieve all the users and retrieve a single statement from the MongoDB database. Now you can see we successfully created the API of this application, and we also tested this API on Postman testing tool. So once the API is ready, let me show you how to use it and display all the record of the MongoDB database in the browser. So next I'm going to show you how to use this API and display all the record of the MongoDB database in the browser. Now, once you understand how to create API using Express, let me show you how to work with it. So as you can notice, in the CURD application, we only have one record inside this table. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to get all the records from my database and display them inside this table. So I'm going to just back to my project and open the render.js file. And inside this file, as you know, we have this render method to render this index file. But here, instead of rendering just an index file, I'm going to just pass data with this render method, so I can access it in the index file. So I'm going to specify here comma, and in the curly braces, I'm going to say users and specify data. So here I'm going to say new data. I'm going to pass value to this user key. Save the changes, and now I can access this variable inside my index file. So I'm going to just open my views, and here in this index.ejs, I can just access this variable users. So I'm going to just back to the index.ejs, and just out of this form, I'm going to add ejs syntax and get rid of this statement right from here, specify equal to sign and say users. Save the changes, reload the browser, and as you can notice, I'm going to have my data here. So now what we are going to do is, I'm going to get all the data from the MongoDB database and pass that to this user, so I can access it and display all the records of my MongoDB database in the index file. So inside this home route, I'm going to make the GET request. So up here, I'm going to just say constant Axios. I'm going to just require Axios module, and this module is going to allow us to make a request. Just out of that, inside this home route right here, I'm going to just make a GET request to the API users, right? So here I'm going to say Axios dot get. I'm going to call GET request of Axios library. Just out of that, in the single quote, I'm going to pass the URL of the API users. So I'm going to just copy this URL, paste it here, and then I'm going to specify API users. So I'm going to make a GET request and call this GET route. This GET request is going to return promise. So I'm going to get that promise using then method, and here I'm going to say function response. So I'm going to send a response here. So I'm going to just grab this statement, paste it here, and instead of this user new data, I'm going to pass here response dot data. So inside this response, I have a data property, and inside this data property, I have all the records of my MongoDB database. Let me show you. If I say here console.log and specify here response, save the changes. Don't forget to call the catch method. I'm going to say here catch. Then I'm going to call the callback function like this. And here I'm going to say response.send and then send the error. Save the changes, reload the browser, and as you can notice, I'm going to have object as a response. And when you open your terminal, you have your response in the console. So this object, this response object, will going to return the result something like this. Inside this object, you have different properties. You can access all these properties from this object. This is the type of get request. So you can access this method property as well, and you can access this data property as well. Inside this data property, you have all the response. So I'm going to just access this data property. So here I'm going to say response dot data, save the changes and reload the browser. As you can notice, I'm going to have my data as a response. So once I have my response, let me just get rid of this console from here and iterate over this object inside this index.ejs file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this terminal, back to the index.ejs, and instead of display these users here, I'm going to iterate over these users. So as you know, I have all the user data inside this show partial file. So I'm going to get rid of this statement like this, save this file and open the show.ejs file from this include folder, this one. And then here, before this table row, I'm going to add ejs syntax like this. And here I'm going to say for where I is equal to 0, I'm going to start the iteration from 0 and say here if I is less than users dot length. If the I variable is less than user dot length, I'm going to just increase the value of I variable using incremental operator. Just out of that, I'm going to start this iteration. So I'm going to specify opening curly braces, and don't forget to close these curly braces down here. So I'm going to just add here ejs syntax like this and close this for loop. And instead of these hard-coded values, I'm going to get rid of these hard-coded values and print variables. So I'm going to call ejs syntax with equal to sign to print value, and then I'm going to first specify id. So here I'm going to say I. Right now this I has value 0, but I don't want to start my id from 0. So I'm going to say here I plus 1. Just out of that, I'm going to copy this syntax, paste it here, and instead of I plus 1, I'm going to specify users of I, and then I'm going to specify dot name. I'm going to just get the records and call the name property from the records. Then I'm going to copy this statement, paste it right here, and this time I'm going to get emails. Then I'm going to just get gender, and this will return status. Save the changes, back to the project and reload it. As you can notice, when I reload the project, I'm going to have all the values of my MongoDB database. So this will just return all the MongoDB database value as a response. Now, once you understand how to get all the records from the MongoDB database, let me show you how to create a new user from this add user form. Now, we all know how to add a user using API. Now, let's take a look at how to add the user using new user form. So I'm going to just pass values to these input text boxes and create a new user and store the data in the MongoDB database. So let me show you how to do it. So I'm going to open my editor, and then I'm going to open the adduser.ejs file. Let me just close these files. As you know, using this method, using this add user, I'm going to just redirect the user to the services add user. And as you know, when the route is matched to add user, I'm going to render this adduser.ejs file. And in this file, I have the add user form. Let me just open this form. So I have this form in the partial file of form.ejs. I'm going to open it, and here you can notice I have this add user form. So let me just pass action attribute to this form. So to this form, I'm going to say action, and in the action attribute, I'm going to pass this post request URL, this one. So I'm going to copy this route and pass right here like this. Save the changes. So what it does, when we click on the submit button, it's going to pass this post request to this route. So when the post route is matched, it's going to store all the data of this form in the MongoDB database. So what I want, when I click on the submit button of this form, I want to redirect the user to this URL. And as you know, on this URL, I have this post route. So I'm going to just execute this post route and create and store this data in the MongoDB database. And then I'm going to redirect the user back to the add users. So if you just open the controller.js file, you can notice inside this create, I'm going to return the data as a response. But now let me just redirect the user to the specific page. So let me show you how to do it. Here I'm going to say response dot redirect, and using this method I'm going to redirect the user to different URL. So inside this single code, I'm going to specify the path /add user. Back to my browser, and you can notice here I'm going to just specify this path to this redirect method. So when I click on the submit button, I'm going to store all this data in the MongoDB database and redirect the user to this form again. If you want, you can redirect the user to other pages as well. That's upon you. Now once I've done that, let me just add a simple message that the data is successfully inserted. So I'm going to open a new tab and add a jQuery inside this project. So I'm going to say here jQuery cdn.js. I'm going to open cdnjs.com, and from this website I'm going to copy the jQuery CDN right from here, and then I'm going to just paste it before the closing body tag. So down here we have this footer partial file. I'm going to open it, and before this closing body up here I'm going to paste this jQuery like this, and then I'm going to create my custom JavaScript file and link that here. So let me just minimize the server. Inside this asset, inside this JS folder, I'm going to create index.js file. This is my custom JavaScript file. I'm going to first link this. So inside this folder, I'm going to say script. Then here I'm going to specify /js index.js. I don't have to specify the relative path of this file because in the server.js, I have the virtual path js to add JS file inside this project. So I don't need to specify any relative path inside this source attribute. Let me just save the changes. Back to the index.js, which is my custom JavaScript file. When I click on the submit button, I want to alert a message. So here I'm going to just say $, and in the parentheses, I'm going to just specify #add user. So I'm going to just specify this ID, add user of this form inside this index.js. When I click on the submit button, so I'm going to call here submit event. When I click on the submit button of the form, I want to call this function. So here I'm going to say function event, and inside this function I'm going to say alert, and in the double quote I'm going to say data inserted successfully. Save the changes and back to the browser. Let me close this tab, back to the CURD application and reload it. Now let me create a new user. So here I'm going to just specify name of the user and the email of the user. Then I'm going to specify gender, female, and status inactive. Now, when I click on this save button, this data will save in the MongoDB database and you will get a message, data successfully inserted. When I click on this save button, you can notice you will have a message, data inserted successfully. When I press OK, this will reload the browser, and when you back to your root route, you will have your data. You have 6 records in your database. So now once you understand how to successfully add a user inside your database, let me show you how to update the user. Now once you understand how to add a new user inside MongoDB database using new user form, let me show you how to update the record of the MongoDB database. So as you know, I already have update form in this project. So when I click on this edit button, this will open the update user form. Here, using this form, I'm going to update the user. But when I click on this edit button, I want to get all this information of the current user and display them inside these text boxes as well as inside these radio buttons. So how can I do it? Let me show you how to get the user data inside these text boxes and update it. So I'm going to just back to my editor and I'm going to open the render.js file. To this update user, I'm going to just render this update user template. But instead of just returning the update user, I'm going to return the data as well with this render method. I'm going to just make a request. So here I'm going to say axios.get, and I'm going to make a get request, and here I'm going to call this URL, paste it inside these parentheses in the single quote, and then specify curly braces, and inside it I'm going to say params : in the curly braces I'm going to say ID, and say here request.query.id. Now I'm going to pass this option because I want to get a specific user from the database. Here you can notice when I make this request will return all the data from the database. But at this time, I just wanted to get the specific user from the database instead of returning all the user. So I'm going to pass here params with a query ID. Just out of this query down here, I'm going to call then method. Inside it, I'm going to call a function with a data parameter, and here I'm going to say response.render, and I'm going to render this update user EJS template. But this time I'm going to pass the user data as well. So here I'm going to say user data dot data. Let me just change this name to user data. I'm going to say here user data. Let me just change this as well, user data. So I'm going to get the specific user data and pass it to this user object. So once I have the user, I'm going to just specify that data inside input text boxes. So let me just get it out the statement and call the catch method. So here I'm going to say catch error and just say response.send error. Save the changes. And now what you need to do is when you open this URL in the browser, you need to pass value to this ID variable. So as you know, when you open this update user, you don't have this ID variable here. So what I'm going to do is when I click on this user, I'm going to pass ID with the URL. If you just inspect this window, then you can notice right here, I just have the href attribute update user. I want to add ID with value because I just requested the query with ID variable. So when I make a request on this URL, I need to pass ID as a key and value pair. So I'm going to just back to the show.ejs file, and here you can notice I just have here update user. So instead of just update user, I'm going to pass ID with this URL. So here I'm going to just specify question mark and then call ID is equal to and then pass the ID of the user. So here I'm going to just call this syntax, and instead of user status, I'm going to call ID. Save the changes. When I reload the browser, you will see the href attribute is updated with the user ID. I have the user ID in the URL. If I hover over to this user, I have the ID of this user as well. So in the URL, I'm going to pass the user ID. So when I click on this update, I'm going to have all the data of the user on the update page. But right now, I did not specify the user data inside this user form right here. I have the empty value inside this value attribute. So what we are going to do is, so when I click on this edit button, I'm going to just open this current user with ID variable. I'm going to pass that ID variable to this parameter. So this parameter will make a request to this URL and get a specific record from the database. Then I'm going to get that specific record and pass that with this user variable. So I can access it in this update user file. So let me just access this variable. So let me just open the update user. So at the first input text box inside this value, I'm going to simply call EJS syntax like this with equal sign to print a value, and then say here user dot name. I'm going to just get the user name inside this input text box. I'm going to just access this user from this user variable and just get the name ID. Just out of that, I'm going to copy this syntax, paste it up here to get the user ID. Here I'm going to specify underscore ID. Just out of that, I need to specify email. So I'm going to paste the EJS syntax again. Here I'm going to say email. I'm not going to do the same with this radio buttons because the radio button don't have value attribute because the radio button has check event. So right here I'm going to paste my EJS syntax like this, and here I'm going to call the if ternary operator. So I'm going to say here user dot gender. If it is equal to male, then I'm going to return checked. Otherwise, return nothing. That's it. Let me just copy this EJS syntax, paste it here, and here I'm going to do the same, but this time I'm going to change this value with female. I'm going to copy this statement, paste it to this status radio button as well, and this time I'm going to change this user dot status, and I'm going to change the value to active. Copy the syntax, paste it down here, change this active to inactive, save the changes and reload it. Now let me click on this edit button and show you the magic. Let me click on this third user. When I click on it, as you can notice, I have all the data of the user inside these text boxes, as well as you will get these checked radio buttons. That's super easy, right? When I click on this save button, I want to submit this form and update all these values. If you just open the update user.ejs, then you can notice here I don't have any action attribute to this form. I'm not going to specify here any action attribute because I don't want to redirect the user anywhere else. So I'm going to save this file as it is, close it. I'm going to back to my index.js, and here I'm going to just access my update form. So I'm going to say here dollar in the parentheses, I'm going to call hash update user. You can notice here in the update user, I have this ID update user. I'm going to access this form using this ID. So I'm going to say here update user dot submit. So when I click on the submit button of this form, I want to execute this function with event parameter. Just after that, I'm going to say here event dot prevent default. I'm going to change the default behavior of this form. As you know, the default behavior of the form is to reload the browser when you click on the submit button. But this statement will stop that default behavior. Just after that, here I'm going to get all the data from the submitted form, var unindexed array, and then I'm going to call dollar in the double quote. I'm going to specify update user, or you can pass here this. Both are identical. Just after that, I'm going to say here dot and call a method serialize array. This method is going to return a serialized array of the data. So when you click on the submit button, I'm going to get all the submitted data inside this variable. Let me show you. So down here, I'm going to say console.log and say unindexed array. Let me just save the changes, back to the browser and reload it. Now, let me click on this submit button. But before I click on the submit button, let me open the inspect tool and open the console. Now, when I click on the submit button, you will have the result something like this. This will return the name ID and value of this ID variable. What I want to make this ID as a key of this value. So I can pass this array to the put request and update the current user. Let me show you what I want to say. So just out of this statement right here, I'm going to call the map method. So here I'm going to call dollar map, and as a first argument, I'm going to pass my array, unindex array, and then call a function. Here I'm going to say n, and I. So the first argument will return all the data from this array, and this I will return the index from this array. Inside this map, I'm going to create my new array. So up here, I'm going to say var data is equal to, and then pass here object. So inside this map, I'm going to say data. I'm going to call this variable data, and in the square bracket, I'm going to say n, specify square bracket. In the single quote, I'm going to say name. Then just out of that, I'm going to specify here equal to sign and say n. In the square bracket, I'm going to say value. Let me just print this data on the console. Save the changes and reload the browser. Let me click on this save button. As you can notice, I'm going to have the result what I want. Then I have email and its value. So now I can pass this data to the put request and update this record. Just after this console.log, down here, I'm going to create a variable request. You can specify any name to this variable, that doesn't matter. And here I'm going to pass an object. Inside this object, I'm going to pass value to the Ajax. I'm going to use Ajax to make a request to the server and get the response from the server. So I'm going to specify here key URL, and in the backtick operator, I'm going to pass URL. Let's copy this URL right from here and paste it inside this URL section. So here I'm going to say http localhost 3000 update, and I'm going to get rid of this update user and call my route, which is API users. And here I'm going to say API users. I'm going to just make put request with ID. So I need to specify value to this ID variable when I make a request. So here I'm going to pass $, and in the curly braces, I'm going to say data dot ID. So as you can notice here, inside this data, I have this ID variable, this one. So I can access this ID using this ID key, and I'm going to just pass this value with this URL. Just for that, I'm going to specify comma here, then specify the type of method. Method is a type of put, and then I'm going to pass a data with this request. And as you know, I have data inside this data variable. I'm going to pass this updated data. Just for that, let me just make this request. So here I'm going to call $.ajax. Using jQuery Ajax, I'm going to make this request, and I'm going to pass here request variable. And then if we have the successful request, I'm going to just execute this done method, and this will just call this callback function with response. I'm not going to print any response here. Instead, I'm going to just say here alert with a message data updated successfully. Save the changes and reload it. And now let me update this data. So I'm going to just update this gender and the status of this user. I'm going to change it to male, and I'm going to specify status inactive. When I click on the save button, I'm going to have the alert message, and this form will update this current user data. When I click on the save button, as you can notice, I'm going to have here data updated successfully message, and when I reload the browser, you can notice this data is now updated. Let me change this email. I'm going to just change this email, and here I'm going to say test.com. I want to update this email, so I'm going to say here test.com and click on this save button. When I click on it, I'm going to have a message data updated successfully. When I press OK and reload the browser, you can notice the data is now updated. And when I back to my root route, here you can notice I have this updated data test.com. Now we know that how to create a new user, how to get all the records from the MongoDB database, and we also know how to update the user using this edit button. The last thing we need is to understand how to delete the user from the database. So next, I'm going to show you how to delete the data from the MongoDB database using this delete button. Now let's understand how to delete a specific record from this database. So as you can notice, I have this delete button to delete a specific record. So what I want, when I click on this button, I want to delete this specific record from this database, and I want to display a message as well that the data is successfully deleted. So let me show you how to do it. I'm going to back to my editor and open the show.ejs file, and here I have this button. I'm going to use this button to delete this data. To this button, I'm going to pass a data attribute and get the user ID. So to this anchor tag up here, I'm going to say data ID is equal to, and right here I'm going to pass this user ID like this. So to this data ID, I have this user ID. I'm going to get this user ID when I click on this button and make a delete request and delete the specific user. So I'm going to save the changes. Back to the index.js, and here I'm going to make a delete request. So here I'm going to create the if statement. So down here I'm going to say if window.location.pathname. If it is equal to the root path, then I'm going to execute this if statement, because as you know, I don't have any href attribute to this anchor tag. So when I click on this anchor tag, I'm not going to navigate the user anywhere else. Let me just back to the index.js, and inside this if statement, here I'm going to say $on delete. I'm going to create a variable $on delete, and I'm going to just select my delete button. Here I'm going to call $ in the parentheses. I'm going to say .table. I'm going to select the table, then select table body, table data element, and select anchor tag with delete class. As you can notice, I have this delete class to this anchor tag. I'm going to select it. So when I click on this button, so here I'm going to say on delete dot click. When I click on this button, I'm going to execute this function. and I'm going to get the data ID of this anchor tag. So here I'm going to say var id is equal to $this dot attribute. I'm going to call a method attribute, and in the double quote I'm going to say data ID. So using this statement, I'm going to get the current user ID from this data attribute. Now just after that, once I have this ID, inside this ID variable I can make a request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this request variable, paste it down here, and inside this request I'm going to make a request to this delete route. As you know, I'm going to just call this API user and pass ID to it. So here I'm going to say API user and pass ID. I don't have this data variable here, so I'm going to get rid of this data variable and just specify this ID variable. Just for that, this is a type of delete request. So I'm going to get rid of this put and say here delete. And then I'm not going to specify any data with this request, so I'm going to get rid of this data from here. Down here, I'm going to get the user permission to delete the record. So here I'm going to say if, and in the if statement, I'm going to call the confirm method. This is the inbuilt method in JavaScript. This will just get the permission from the user. Here I'm going to say confirm, and in the double quote, I'm going to say, do you really want to delete this record? Then I'm going to specify here curly braces, and inside this if statement, I'm going to say if the user specify yes, I'm going to execute this if statement. So here I'm going to call the Ajax request, this one. Copy this request and paste it inside this if statement. In this alert, I'm going to say data deleted successfully, and then I'm going to reload the browser. So here I'm going to say location dot reload. Back to the browser and reload it. So let me just add a new user. Here I'm going to say user 1 example user @test.com, specify gender male, inactive. When I click on the save button, it will insert this record inside the MongoDB database. Back to the all users, and here you can notice I have this record. Let me just delete it. So I'm going to click on this delete button. When I click on it, this will just ask me, do you really want to delete this record? Yes, I want. I'm going to click on this OK button. When I click on it, you can notice I have the alert message, data deleted successfully. When I press OK, as you can notice, this will delete this record from the database. At the end, let me show you how this application works. I'm going to add a new user using this new user button. I'm going to click on it and add a new user. Here I'm going to specify username, daily tuition. And inside this email, I'm going to say dailytuition@gmail.com. Specify gender, male, and specify status active. Let me click on the save button to save this record in the database. When I click on it, the data is now successfully inserted in the MongoDB database. Press OK and back to the all users. So here you have your data. But you can notice I misspelled this spelling of this daily tuition. Let me just update it. So I'm going to click on this update icon. And right from here, I'm going to just update this spelling. So here I'm going to say T. So now we have the daily tuition inside this text box. You can notice all the data of the record is automatically filled inside this form. Just after that, I'm going to click on the save button to update this record. When I click on it, I'm going to have alert message, data updated successfully. Click on the save and back to the all users. As you can notice, the data is now successfully updated. Just after that, I want to delete this record from this table. So I'm going to click on this delete button. When I click on this delete button, the application will ask you, do you really want to delete this data? Yes, I want to delete it. So I'm going to click on this OK. When I click on this OK, you will get an alert message, data deleted successfully. And when you click OK, the data is successfully deleted from your database. Now, I hope you understand how to create CRUD application using Express and MongoDB database. If you find anything useful, don't forget to click on the like button of this video. Make sure you click on the subscribe button to get all the latest videos. If you want to download the source code, the link is in the description. That is all for now. I will see you in the next one.